Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be building off of what we talked about on Monday and what you practiced yesterday. So on Monday we talked about um, the how we just create a setting, how we show a setting using imagery. And I want to remind you that imagery is any time words are used to create any kind of physical sensation. So it's not just pictures, but sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. And I also briefly, maybe not even briefly, I think I talked about this quite a bit actually on Monday, that when we actually take the time to create these physical sensations and we use verbs, that was yesterday's practice, was really using verbs to elaborate on those physical sensations, that when we do that, then all of a sudden our imagery takes on emotional weight. And so what I really want to focus on today is creating the type of emotional weight that will be appropriate for your story. Now, I know that some of you may not have a story yet. I know that some of you do have a story already that you want to explore, and I'm kind of holding you back. Yesterday was just about just using verbs to describe your setting and really just kind of fleshing out your setting a little bit. But this is for those people who are just at the beginning stages of just creating a setting, or if you know where you want your story to go, let's take it slow and let's make sure that this all happens appropriately, because one thing that's really important is making sure that wherever you're and it's not just where but when, so wherever and whenever your story is taking place, they are also creating the appropriate type of emotional response in your audience for that story, so that it's not funny when it shouldn't be, it's not sad when it shouldn't be, it's not depressing when it shouldn't be, but that you're always making sure that the setting has the appropriate emotional response from the audience. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you have not yet done so, you should be ready for notes. So make sure that you pause right now and get your notes document wherever those are so that you can keep those notes and refer back to them for the assignment. Now that you have your notes, let's talk about how imagery can be emotional. And I know that we did talk about this a little bit on Monday, but I want to expand on it a little bit more now. We had the baby example with the hair and how that was all very loving and warm, and I kind of focused on positive emotions on Monday. But we know that emotions have a wide range. Sometimes we feel good, sometimes we don't feel good, sometimes something's funny, sometimes it's funny in a very dark way, sometimes it's funny in a very light way. There's so many different emotions that we can experience, and we can really use imagery to create those emotional experiences in a way that is going to be meaningful for our audience, but it needs to be also appropriate for the setting and for the story that will emerge out of that setting. So how can this be emotional? Well, it all comes down to the things that we choose to describe and the physical sensations that accompany those descriptions. So if we know that we're describing a scary story, we're not going to be describing the bright flowers in a way that makes them happy and bright and and positive. We have to find a way, if we want to describe those flowers, we have to find a way to describe the flowers in a way that in such a way that they're going to carry the kind of fearsome weight that we want them to have, right? Same as if we're trying to write a love story that takes place, in the rain. The rain can be very depressing, so we have to find ways to describe the rain that isn't going to make the love story feel depressing and downtrodden, but in a way that's going to create that kind of emotional weight that it can create. And so one of the ways that we do that is that we choose the emotional sensations. So we choose to create certain physical sensations that will bring out the emotions that we want to be appropriate. If we describe the rain as being like a warm embrace because it's in the tropics, then all of a sudden, the rain kind of feels warm and like it's hugging us, and that sets the scene for a romantic relationship rather than something that's depressing. So let's look at a couple of examples. In example one, we've got this sentence: the hot sting of metal tore through Krita's arm, leaving only a sizzling lump of flesh. Now, there's plenty of imagery here, right? We've got the feeling of the hot sting of metal. We've got the sound, the sizzling sound of the metal tearing through this person's arm. We've got the sight of just, somebody's arm being ripped off. And all of a sudden, this sentence has this emotional weight to it, right? Like the feel and the sound and the sight evoke in us a sense of pain and suffering and fear and disgust, right? We know that wherever this sentence fits in the grander scheme of things, that we should be feeling, especially that fear and disgust, that this is something bad that's happening, right? That this is that we don't like it, that our stomach should be churned a little bit, right? And the imagery there is really creating that emotional response for us. If we look at the second example, the spicy aroma of ginger snap cookies lingered in the warm kitchen as Grandma dawdled about cleaning up. Completely different, right? Like we still have these this imagery where we've got the smell of ginger snap cookies, right? The warmth of the kitchen. We've got the image of Grandma dawdling about cleaning up, right? Like, so smell and touch and feel and sight. But in this case, that imagery is really creating this kind of loving, warm laziness, like the nostalgia of, being with Grandma and what that must have been like, and the sweetness. Even maybe we even get some taste of the cookies. So like it's creating a completely different emotional experience for us. Both of these sentences are meant to do that. And so we know that example one and example two must come from two completely different places because they're creating two completely different emotional experiences. They wouldn't make sense to be put together, right? So when we write about what else is happening here, when we choose to describe the rest of this scene, we also have to be sticking with those emotional images that go along with them. So I'd like to look at one last example. These were single sentence examples just to kind of show you how those verbs and how that imagery can really kind of start to create that emotion. But let's look at how a professional writer does it. So this is an example from the book 1984, which is a book that you probably will read later. This isn't necessarily a ninth grade book, but this is the beginning of the book, and he's just describing the world that 1984 takes place in. And I've also provided this picture for you so that you can kind of even get a little bit more of that. But you can see that it says, "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him." So this is just this, I guess, two sentences, right? Two sentences of this world that Winston Smith lives in 1984. And we already get an emotional sense of it from the imagery. So we see the image, we know that it's bright, we know that it feels cold, right? We get the sound of these clocks striking. We get the image of Winston kind of burying his chin into his chest. We get the sensation of the wind whipping around him. We get the grit of the dust. Maybe we can feel the grit of the dust in our eyes, and just all of this, kind of nastiness of this world around. It's not a pleasant place, right? So we get the feeling, and we get the sound, and we get the sight of this world. It also kind of seems very gray, right? To me, the sight is very gray or brown. It's just kind of downtrodden and depressing. And so I get the emotional sense of being unsettled, of being kind of on edge, that this is a harsh world, that it's a dirty world, that it's a depressing world, that it's not a pleasant place to be in. And that really comes down to these examples of imagery and the physical sensations that we're having as we kind of go through this example. And that's definitely what I'm going to ask you to work on tomorrow, as you do tomorrow's writing activity. So tomorrow's writing activity will build on the writing activity that you did on Tuesday. But I'm going to ask you to go back and I'm going to ask you to think about the emotions that you want to evoke in your audience as you describe the setting of your writing. So now that you should have spent some time writing several sentences about the setting and focusing on the, the physical sensations and using verbs to create those physical sensations. I'm going to ask you to go back to that and revisit it and see, do those verbs and physical sensations, are they really evoking the types of emotions that you also want to accompany with that? So that will be your activity for tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.